Le Mazurier in the newsroom. Ethiopia has lost its leader of 21 years. Prime Minister Meles Zenawi had not been seen in public for months. He died in hospital in Brussels. The man who started out as a Marxist rebel became a darling of the West after overthrowing the bloody regime of Mengistu Haile Mariam and twice invading Somalia to push back Islamist radicals. But his policies, most notably his radical land reforms, came at a price. He cracked down on minorities and dissenting opinions. Right now there's even 2 Swedish journalists in jail. He won the last general election with an unlikely 99.6% of the vote. Did the outside world look the other way in the name of broader regional interests? What change to expect now in an African powerhouse of 84 million citizens? Today, in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Ethiopia after Meles. And with us from New York, the former BBC correspondent in Ethiopia, François Picard. Thank you for being with us. Joining us from Washington, Dr. Ahmed Moen, who teaches health policy and political science at Washington's Howard University. From Nairobi, Daniel Howden of The Independent, the London-based paper. And here in the studio, France 24's Alexis Mascardi, formerly based in East Africa. Welcome, sir. The France 24 debate, where you can always weigh in on the conversation, and you have on Facebook, as well as on Twitter, where you can find us at François F24. Meles Zenawi was 57. His death staunchly denied for a long while, especially when he failed to show at the African Union summit his nation hosted in June. His return home from Brussels, though, to be followed by a state funeral and then the expected swearing-in of his deputy, Haile Mariam Desalegn.
This is the greatest leader that Ethiopia has witnessed. This is the man of change. This leader has changed the nation entirely. And therefore everybody is sad, and it's a shock and disbelief.
Ahmed Moen, before we go into the specifics of his policies, Meles Zenawi was a figure known on the entire African continent.
Yes, I think he prominently was identified as one of the young leaders of Africa, and following the footsteps of the Emperor Haile Selassie, who founded the OAU, but he now excelled and went beyond that for being very active on international scene as well as the African politics. And as such, he is a known quantity, and perhaps I was in Addis Ababa, the last AU meeting. So I think all the head of states expressed their concern that if something happens and they have believed and have respected him for representing Africa as a new young leader. And also is very articulate on issue of economic development for Africa, as well as also his concern for the regional stability and peace, particularly in the Horn of Africa. So he became a great player, political player, as far as the African politics is concerned.
It was 5 years after the famine that gripped the world's attention that Meles Zenawi helped lead a coalition of rebel movements that toppled the regime of Mengistu Haile Mariam.
Meles Zenawi dominated Ethiopian public life for more than 2 decades, first as president, then as prime minister. He came to power in 1991, deposing dictator Mengistu Haile Mariam's military junta as head of the rebel Tigray People's Liberation Front. After his years with the guerrillas, Meles wasn't afraid to use his military. In 1998, a border dispute with neighboring Eritrea turned into a full-scale conflict. Tens of thousands died before he signed a ceasefire 2 years later. Meles also sent troops into Somalia at the end of 2006 to support that nation's weak transitional government.
The Ethiopian Defense Forces are obligated to go to war to protect the sovereignty of the nation and push back the repeated attacks of the terrorists from Islamic tribunals and the anti-Ethiopian elements supporting them.
They engaged in heavy fighting with Islamist militants who control much of the country and capital to this day. It made Meles a key regional player, and close US ally in the war on terror.
Somalia, but Alexis Mascarelli, there was, of course, the wars with Eritrea.
Indeed, from 2 years of bloody war, tens of thousands of people killed, soldiers killed on both sides between Ethiopia and Eritrea between 1998 and 2000. Many thought it was a meaningless conflict, really, for a piece of desert between the two countries, especially because it happened between two armies or two leaders who used to be brothers in arms, fighting against the Mengistu regimes 15 years before that. I think regionally also we'll remember that there is serious concerns today. We heard one of the first reactions that came this morning after we heard about Mele's death was from Kenya, from Prime Minister Odinga, who said he was concerned about the possibility of a power vacuum in Addis Ababa. I think in Mogadishu also today, where we are just setting up a new parliament, maybe a new president being elected this week, will be very interesting in knowing what's going to happen in Addis in the next few days. As you mentioned, Ethiopia has troops there at their border. They came in 2006 to fight the Al-Shabaab militia.
Frehiwa Tige Shifera, the reactions that we seem to be getting from Addis Ababa seem to be mixed when it comes on. For some people, it's shock. Others were well braced for this.
You know, Mele Zenawi never managed to get full support from the crowd. At least I can speak for Addis. A lot of intellectuals, a lot of business people, many youth as well, were not necessarily supporting his cause because, you know, they saw him as a ruthless leader. On the other hand, you have many people who benefited from him staying in power for 21 years. One of the many criticisms, for instance, against Meles could have been that he pushed the ethnic agenda, favoring his own ethnic group beyond others. And a lot of other ethnic groups, including the Oromos, who are the majority of the population, like 40% of the population, felt left out. Same thing for the Amharas. He's left behind a very mixed legacy. It's not exactly clear what his legacy is at the moment. Some people might say he left the country divided.
And do you think Alexis Mascarelli is right to talk about fears of a power vacuum?
The situation at the moment is very tricky. You mentioned the name of Haile Mariam Desalegn. It looks like he is the acting prime minister since he was nominated as the deputy prime minister in 2010 after the elections. The opposition television abroad, there's a channel called ISAT, mentioned that he might be nominated as the next PM. And if so, it could be within the next few days. This needs to be confirmed. If it is confirmed, then obviously there will be no power vacuum. However, it will be very interesting to see whether he can hold and how long for. He belongs to an ethnic group that never held power. And there are fears that maybe within the TPLF, the party that Mele Zenawi belonged to, might want to take their share back.
Ahmed Moen, do you share those fears?
Well, I have my personal opinion. 1989, I was among 8 professors who were selected to create a dialogue forum between the Derg and the rebel unions, rebel groups at that time before the fall down of Addis Ababa. And our purpose was to see that Ethiopia should never become like Monrovia or Mogadishu in the aftermath of the downfall of the Derg or the military junta. So my contact with him and my group called Peace and Development in Ethiopia was very early. So in 1991, when the thing happened, the London conference, and Mele Zenawi and Isaias came together, they have involved at that time the Oromo Liberation Front as part of the tripartite, or the 3 ethnic groups who will be able to rule Ethiopia. But in the long run, they couldn't do that. So Eritrea seceded from Ethiopia, and therefore here is a departure from the old traditional way of doing politics in Ethiopia, the idea of a republic based on federalism. So I think one of his contribution, of course, there is a question, people who question whether ethnicity or federal ethnicity was, or ethnic federalism is useful for Ethiopia. But after 21 years, I think the Ethiopian culture and history is so solid behind the concept. It is one nation with many tribes and so on. So that part didn't materialize except for the cessation of Eritrea. I think, but the second is it created the new
and I'm sorry, and also a rebel movement in the east of the country.
Yeah, but the east, there is still a rebel movement in the east of the country. It's called in Somalia and other things. So, but the question is, does federalism replace centralism under the old monarchy or the military government? So in this case, it is an experiment, yet has to prove that it has succeeded. But this regionalization, I think in terms of economic terms, some of areas have benefited more. But my observation is after 21 years that Meles has matured from his leftist and radical views about everything is anti-establishment, coming to be a governor. He's just ruling a nation. So that part of it created some economic stability and some other benefit, like building, improving the higher education and bringing a lot of other economic benefit. But on the other hand, of course, concept of human rights is also another issue, the press and other things. But in this thing, I think I'm speaking on behalf of some of the religious groups, or like Islam, Muslims in Ethiopia, or certain minority groups that have been. For example, the Constitution of 1994 seems to have that.
Let's pick up first. Let's pick up first on the point you mentioned about all the progress that's been made economically, and then maybe talk about your other point afterwards. Domestically, Meles Zenawi championing what's been branded by some authoritarian development, which Alexis Mascarelli stamped out famine. There's been double-digit growth, but at what price?
At a price that there are still extreme levels of poverty all around Ethiopia. I remember traveling to the eastern region of Harar. It's a very hilly, lush region where most of the Ethiopian coffee, the famous Ethiopian coffee, is produced. And I was amazed to see how many families lived on that land. You had families of farmers with 10, 15 children cultivating 1 hectare of land if they were lucky. So making very, very little money. And Meles had an idea at the time when I was there to transfer those people from a very highly dense populated region to the more arid parts of the country in the west. And they were offering people free education. They were telling them, you move to that part, we'll give you a health center, we'll give you tools, there will be a river there, it will be easy. And those people say, yeah, sure, we'll go. So it was not forced repatriation. They forced those people, they told those people they would find paradise. And I followed some of those people, and I went there, and they were coming out of trucks. And there was literally nothing. They were in the middle of the countryside. There was no school, there was no health center, there was no water, there was no tools. They were very angry at the government. They said that, people have been lying to us. We came here on a voluntary base, but people lied to us. And I remember then driving back to the capital, Addis Ababa, seeing people walking on the road, and I recognized their clothing, and they were from this ethnic group that I knew from the east of the country. And I said, what are you doing here? We've been walking for 2 days already. It's like,
so they were walking home?
They were walking 1,000 kilometers back home. They say, those people in the government, they've lied to us. And it was a very tricky situation. I went back to Addis Ababa, tried to get government ministers speaking to us, like, oh, we can't. It's his Meles pet project. We can't even talk about it.
Frewa Tsige Shifarau, your thoughts on how there's been a growth in Ethiopia. Again, double-digit growth, but with some of the consequences that Alexis was mentioning.
Precisely. Besides, when it comes down to this double-digit growth, at the end of the day, it's a number that was given by the government. Who else can actually double-check those digits? No one. When it comes down to growth, if you take a city like Addis Ababa, where I spent the last 8 years, I just moved to the US recently, there is growth. You can see constructions, you can see road being built, you can see even mobile phone networks, increasing within the countryside and so on. There has been changes. I'm not disputing that. On the other hand, though, the economic growth has not benefited everybody. It has only benefited a small minority. If you take the city of Addis right now, like last month, I can give you good examples. Portions of the city, not exactly slums, because slums in Addis, unlike a lot of other cities, are not located in one specific area. They're scattered all over town. Most of the slums, a lot of middle class, houses, villas, and so on, have been completely destroyed, breaking up complete communities, therefore people losing jobs, being relocated God knows where. They can't even move into these so-called government condominiums because the rent is way too high. Over the last 2 years, since 2008, with the financial crisis worldwide, with the price of petrol going high, people could barely buy food. I mean, let's face it, staple food became out of price even for well-off families. Life is expensive in Addis, not like 7 years ago in 2004 when I moved in, where everything was fairly cheap. Things have changed and people are struggling to make ends meet, simple as that. As for the education improving, higher education in particular, I completely dispute that. I don't think that the youth today think that higher education in Ethiopia is actually very good. In fact, any given chance to study abroad, get a scholarship, they'll take it and they go. And I know plenty of them who have.
The brain drain from Ethiopia due
the brain drain is very high. And I can give you, for instance, the medical field. Young students who study in some of the best, medical schools. There's one in Gondar in the northwest of the country. There's one in Addis Ababa. Given the chance, they will leave. They will leave to go anywhere else.
All right, we'll pick up on that point when we come back, Tsige. We're going to take a short break and return. This is the France 24 debate.